who are here to talk about their uncompromising documentary, which follows sort of the economic crisis and white flight out of Spanish Lake, Missouri, which is outside of St. Louis and only 8 miles away from Ferguson, which I'm sure you are well aware of, and the crisis there since Michael Brown was shot and killed. What is it, only how long ago now?
About a month.
Your lives have been chaos ever since, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so this film of yours has followed this movement out of Spanish Lake from its actually from it being this idyllic community in the 1950s and sort of like the cat's meow where the rivers come together. It's helped me with my geography.
Where the Mississippi and Missouri rivers.
The Mississippi and the Missouri, and it forms this beautiful area, and that's where you grew up.
Yes, it is.
When it was beautiful, yeah. And then in the late '90s, things took a turn. And it was, it's really, I think, probably the most fascinating aspect of your film is the way in which it took a turn, like that it was sort of orchestrated, that it was kind of, it seems to me, the government, on one hand, not knowing what to do with the poor and wanting to move them out of high rises and into a more suburban area, thinking that the environment would solve the problem. And on the other hand, real estate agents seizing upon this, real estate companies, I suppose, as an economic opportunity for them. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
How does that, how tell me, like, how you became aware of this in the first place? Because you grew up there, but then you left, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. My family left in 1997, and this was at the height of the white flight that was going on. And I didn't come back to visit till 2007, 10 years later. When I came back to visit, the first house I lived in was abandoned, as was half the block, as was my school, and as was my church. And it was probably one of the worst days of my life. It was emotionally devastating on every level. And in order to make peace with it, I kind of started to investigate white flight in general, just as a process, and all the different dynamics that went into it. And then I just decided to make this as a documentary because I had been working in documentaries, and this was the perfect subject to make a film about.
I mean, it's always a great idea when you can make a film that's personal, that you have something, personally at stake in a way. And what's interesting about your film is you really save some of that for the end of the film. And this film, which you would think would be, the place that it would show the most is in St. Louis, Missouri, was banned. And that's actually how we became aware of it. It was banned by the Wurrenberg theater chain because they were worried about rioting and protests outside of the film. And then it was banned by AMC as well. So the film that's about the St. Louis area and about really the history of that area is not allowed to play in that area, right?
Yeah.
That in and of itself is fascinating because if you look at the film, it's really very balanced. You start out at the reunion of a bunch of original residents from Spanish Lake coming back after years after they have kind of fled the area, and I keep thinking I'm going to see sort of them just be these all-out racists, and that they left because they couldn't stand to be on the same street with an African-American person. But that's not really who I met in your film. And then I expected the African-American people that you spoke to in the film to be really angry, and I didn't really meet those people either. It seems that the film is really about a more universal systemic problem that we have. And I don't know that it gets to any solution per se, but what did you personally arrive at as filmmakers? Hard question. Sorry.
I mean, I think that we were really conscious of the fact that we were trying to give a balanced voice to both the African American community and the Caucasian community, because both have sort of lived the same experience in their own ways. So we took the time to really let both of them have that voice, which is why it's so balanced, and a lot of people want to immediately jump on the racial aspect of it because people like things like that. It's an oversensitized community, and I think that we both knew that there wasn't one answer to this problem, that it was more about creating the dialogue. Is that most people want to hide it away. It's a fear tactic. They're afraid to talk about that because it means they must be racist if they say these commentary about it. But that's not the case. Like, it's not racist to have a conversation, and if they would have had this years ago, things like Ferguson wouldn't be happening.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think it is no surprise that they were scared of the film playing there, because it really does actually explore and kind of uncover the underlying reason for all of this tension. But anyway, without further ado, let's get everybody on the same page. Let's take a look at the trailer for Spanish Lake.
Spanish Lake was the place I grew up.
You could walk anywhere at any time and say hi to anybody.
1950s to 1980s America.
If you've talked to other people in Spanish Lake, there's a Spanish Lake cliche that I grew up hearing. I don't have a problem with black people, it's niggers.
The neighbors started out making a promise that you wouldn't sell to any blacks, but then they started selling to them.
When I came in here to look at homes, I saw for sale signs all over the place.
And said, it's time to go. You know, and we kind of saw the writing on the wall.
There are some serious issues out here.
Real estate brokers will lead people to certain areas.
Instead of just one house going up for sale, it'd be 3 or 4 in a row.
So it had to do with money.
I think it's a governmental push.
Political correctness is the same thing as intellectual death. We will never have true integration. We are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the last 50 and 60 years.
Oh, some people like to call it Somalia, but it ain't that bad, you know.
So it was a community where doors were unlocked, although you always throw in somebody who kind of says, well, actually, one guy's like, everybody locked their doors. But in general, the culture was one that was extremely open, trusting, and middle class, struggling middle class, but it had a sense of small town affluence even still, it seemed like. For you growing up there, is that how it was? Did you feel like your mom and dad were struggling? Were you a latchkey kid? How was it for you?
Yeah, I'd say at the beginning my parents were struggling for sure. And it was a low-income neighborhood. And both my parents, well, my dad was working and then my mom got a job. So I had a dual-income family. And I think the community in Spanish Lake in my neighborhood, all the parents kind of watched after each other's kids. So it was kind of more of a community effort. And that helped make sure that the kids were supervised and safe. I think that aspect was true. But in terms of everybody loving each other and getting along and that there's no crime or no violence, that's definitely not true. There were bullies, there were people breaking into houses, there were drugs, just like there is today.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But what I thought you did really skillfully was show sort of, the way that it was built. These communities and condominiums that were built that were where you wanted to hang out, where the pool and the swing set were, and then just seeing, like countryside take that turn was shocking, really. But it all started, it seemed like it really hit at first in the schools because the schools were overwhelmed. Suddenly there was this new influx of people, and it's called Section 8. Can you explain what Section 8 is to us?
Yeah, it's a voucher system issued by the federal government, and it's for poor people that can't afford normal housing, and they take the voucher, and this voucher pays for usually about 70% of the rent for the month, and then they are only expected to cover 30%. However, due to the laws and due to the actual fine print, it's all based on a fair market value based on your area. So a poor person can't afford to pay 30% in a rich neighborhood. So they're kind of forced to live where it's cheapest to live. So really you just have a ghetto. It's moving the ghetto from one area to the city to the suburbs is what this film is about.
Yeah, it's really good that they, what do they call it, a demolition exploration?
Yeah.
No, a demolition study.
A demolition
study, yeah.
For
So my 10-year-old was watching this with me, watched the whole thing, and his comment was, how is that a study? As they're
just blowing it up.
Yeah.
The building, is really something to see. That was going to be solved because it was somehow there, and they were very. What was it called? Pruitt-Igoe.
Yep.
They were, really stacked in there, and it was a sort of an overwhelming thing to behold. To think of it like that. And I could understand how thinking, okay, well, moving them out of this dirty urban area is going to help turn these families around. But let's look at what happens when they arrive. And there's this tension immediately in the school system. And it really isn't as straightforward as it's whites versus African Americans. It was just a shock, I think, for everyone, and it turned into this. Let's take a look at race riots.
People would come up to me, people I didn't even know, would come up to me and ask me if I was going to be in the race riot, if I had plans. Did I know that next Tuesday is going to be the race riot? After the first time, the teachers knew. The bus drivers knew. Everybody knew. They might as well have put it on the school calendar.
I think it was both, a little bit of both. It's like, okay, we're here, but we have to be here. And so we just want to be treated fairly. Then you have, the African Americans who would provoke certain things because it's like, okay, we're here and we're in a hostile environment, so we just react.
You had people that were starting to be afraid of who was at school and who wasn't and what happened afterwards.
And being afraid of really a lot of the racial mixing, so now these handsome black guys are going to start coming to the school, and my daughters are going to start looking at them, and it's like, oh no.
People talked all the time about how dangerous the animals in Cordova apartments were. But that's almost all the effect I ever saw it had. It was a lot of fear and a lot of talk and not a lot of action. Houses still came up on the market at the usual rate, and they sold at about the usual rate.
So this is starting in the early 90s, right? It was like, what was the population
It was
split?
83% white and 17% black in 1990.
In 1990. And then you get up to the year 2000, and it's the majority switched.
Yeah, 55%
right?
black and 44% white.
Okay.
And currently it's now in the 80% tile white.
Yeah, it's really, No, 80% black.
80% black, 20% white.
And at the same time, all of these families, many of whom have single parent families, the mother might have to work a couple of different jobs just to hold it together. And you have, teenage daughters raising their younger siblings. There's no increase in social services?
There weren't any.
No. We talk about this a lot, that back in the time of Pruitt-Igoe, the men were not allowed to live with the women. They were separated specifically out of those homes. So if you think about sort of the mentality of the African American culture today, there's a lot of homes with no fathers in it. And we believe that it stems from that mentality. If you're taught that you're not allowed to live with your wife and your children, then that breeds over years and years of that being separated out of the home, and you're setting them up for failure. You're setting that stereotype up to happen.
But they would be removed from the home because of abuse or social services saying that they were involved in drugs or something like that, right?
Want to pay for that. They would allow them, women and children, to live in the public housing units, but not the men.
No, that was a standard protocol. Even if the husband was working or not working, the husband wasn't allowed to live with them.
Exactly.
Does that carry through to today?
The public housing is different now. I don't think that it stipulates that they're not allowed to live there. This was when it was originally incepted.
That was at Pruitt-Igoe with those big buildings. That's where the standard nuclear family was decimated in the African American community in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And that just absolutely, destroys,
community. There's no.
So that's at the root of a lot of it.
That's the root of a lot of it.
Let's take a look at how the I mean, this is a really powerful part of your film when we get to the year 2000, to see that, again, it's not a difference in color that's at the root of this. It's not a difference of color that's at the root of Ferguson happening. I mean, there is obviously some racial issues, but it's not that. It's that there's a lack of organization around government support, and it's a real problem. And as I think, you point out in the film, a lot of these people didn't want to leave their homes. They didn't want to go. They had to go. The white people had to run in many cases because violence just got to a level because people weren't being taken care of. So let's take a look at the year 2000.
In 1990, the population in Spanish Lake was predominantly 80% white, and most of the residents were over 50. Well, the 10 years following that, the population shifted from majority white to majority black. Most of the households, along with that shift, were majority single-parent household, with a huge percentage of those being under the poverty line.
So the number of children in Spanish Lake living in poverty increased 200% in 10 years.
There was not a response to that change by San Luis County. Sidewalks were not built. There were not enough schools.
There were zero, nada, not one social service agency working in Spanish Lake. Now that is for 23,000 residents, for a population that has changed, so 1/3 of it is below the age of 18, where you've got a population of about 11%, I think it's 11, in poverty, not one.
So what happened as, this is sort of as the government decided to shift the population of people from Pruitt-Igoe. Part of it was that it was unincorporated, right? Spanish Lake stayed unincorporated because they wanted to have less government involvement. And the irony is they ended up with becoming the dumping ground for the government because they had no protection from that. But as a homeowner myself, I think, as I'm watching your film, I think, what an incredible, sort of conundrum, right? Like, for the community, because on the one hand, there are people that benefited from this. Who were those people? Because the homeowners actually even sold their houses for more as they left, right? For the most part.
Some did, some didn't.
There was like a financial incentive given to them to kind of get out. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
Some did. The early people that left did have an incentive to leave. Some real estate agents would tell them, hey, if you leave now, you'll get everything for your house. But then some of them, the longer they stayed, the more that they would deck them in terms of their selling price. And sometimes they would